into my topic this week. I hope everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving. This week we used ProQuest History newspapers as a database to get our information for a course of History 2, or modern U.S. history. And for this topic, I looked at the fall of Saigon. Video, we're going to look at how things changed within the U.S. government after the fall of Saigon. This was a major event. America lost a war, and so things had to change on many different levels. But just how would they change? And this article looks at that in a few different ways. In this first article we'll look at how U.S. foreign policy changed because of the fall of Saigon. Written in 1977 by Hendrick Smith, this article is an examination of how different things changed on the top levels. The Indochina policy start to change, and the weird thing about this is at the same time we have all these things changing within the government. We have people that won't acknowledge Vietnam. They won't acknowledge the stuff that happens. One quote was, "No one talks about Vietnam anymore." Yet, the thing that no one talks about has a ripple effect through all aspects of U.S. foreign policy. This work went to go on to talk about how would they have relations with China after this. And the last thing they talked about is something that came to fruition. Uh, they felt that people in the policy making aspects of the government said one day we'll have diplomatic ties with Vietnam like any other country. And we do have that. Overall, this was a very good piece in helping people understand the ramifications of the fall of Saigon. In this article, we see the other side of things. We see how the Viet Cong celebrated the war and celebrated what happened. This article looks at a whole lot of information about just what they did and about the type of fighters they had. It's key to talk about things like this as well, just to get a fuller picture for your students. This next article is odd because it takes a look at the Viet Cong's point of view when it comes to this situation. It is entitled Saigon Fall Brought Cheers, and this was found in The Sun. This is a Baltimore paper. This paper describes the cheers that the Viet Cong had after the surrender of Saigon. I think this is super important to speak about, since many times try to understand the other side's point of view. Note, this doesn't mean that you agree with it. This doesn't mean that you think it's right in any way. It just means that you try to understand they were thinking at the time. With something like the Vietnam War, since it is many people know folks who risked their lives or have died in the Vietnam War. If you're teaching, students have parents and grandparents who fought in that war. However, even with that, it is super important that we try to see the war in a complete manner, just like we would with any other historical war. Last interesting thing about this work is that it does not have author linked to it. I wonder if he or she felt that they couldn't put their name on it since this was fresh. It was done in 1975, and they may not have wanted to seem sympathetic for the cause of the Viet Cong.
This last article, we will be looking at the human impact of the fall of Saigon on people from South Vietnam uh, and how many became refugees. This is a hard look at just how these things affect people's lives. The first article talked about policy. The second article talked about the celebrations of the Viet Cong. But now we're going to look at the victims and just what they had to go through.
In this third article, found in the Washington Post, written by Barbara Carton, is entitled Local Refugees Gather to Remember the Fall of Saigon. This is a very interesting piece since many times we do not think about the locals that were refugeed by the fall of Saigon. In this article, we see a man named Nija Hu Hui, and he talks about how he used to be a Buddhist monk, but that all changed when the communists came into full power. He was in jail for over a year and then made his way to the United States. As a monk, we saw people of many different ages highlighted in this write up. We saw people in their 60s who were freelance writers and lawyers. We saw 12-year-old children. We saw teenagers. This article really helps to put a face on the people who were affected when Saigon fell. Many people weren't able to leave and had to face a lot of hardships.
Were the articles for this week. The database, ProQuest History Newspapers, is a hit and miss database, at least for my purposes for this week. Uh, it had a lot of great information, but at the same time, it was hard to find key things I was looking for. With other databases, I can key in and find specific things. With this one, if it wasn't in a major newspaper, I might not be able to find it. And so these are some things to think about when working with this database. Thank you, and I hope to see you guys in my next topic next week.